Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 1. We will present about language choice in multilingual communities. My name is Nisrina Ramadanti.
My name is Yolanda Sekar Sejati.
My name is Sartika Puspita Sari.
My name is Ninuk Wihartami.
My name is Khofifah Saviera.
And the first material will be presented by me. Choosing your variety or code. What is your linguistic repertoire? The linguistic repertoire is the set of skills and knowledge a person has of one or more languages. As we can see in the table, the example 1, if we list the varieties or code he used regularly, we find that Kalala's linguistic repertoire includes 3 varieties of Swahili: standard Zairan, local Swahili, or Kingwana, and Indobil, and 2 varieties of his terrible language, Shi, a formal and an informal or casual style. Next slide, please. Domains of language use. The term domain is usually used to denote the social context of interaction. As we can see the table, example 2, certain social factors, who you are talking to, the social context of the talk, the function and topic of the discussion, turn out to be important in accounting for language choice. Next slide, please. Modeling variety or code choice. As we can see, the table example 4, the information provided in example 4, for instance, identifies 4 domains and describe the variety or code appropriate to each. Domain is clearly a very general concept which draws on 3 important social factors in code choice: participant, setting, and topic. The next material will be explained by Yolanda Sejati.
And for the second material is diglossia. Diglossia in the narrow linguistic division of labor. In the narrow and original sense of the term, diglossia has 3 crucial features. For the first is 2 distinct varieties of the same language are used in the community, with one regarded as a height or age variety and the other a low or L variety. And 2, each variety is used for quite distinct function. H and L complement each other. And for the last is no one used the H variety in everyday conversation. So, in conclusion, a situation in which 2 languages or 2 varieties of the same language are used under different conditions within a community, often by the same speakers. The term is usually applied to language with distinct high and low or colloquial varieties. That's why it's classical example of diglossia, a language which has 2 different versions, the formal one and the one we actually speak in everyday interaction. And for the second is the difference between H and L varieties. For example, the difference in pronunciation for H and L variety. The second is the grammar of the 2 linguistically are diverse. Often the grammar of H is more polygically more complicated. And the third is most of the vocabulary of H and L is the same. But not surprisingly, since it is used in more formal domains, the S vocabulary includes many more formal and technical terms such as conservation and psychometric, while the L variety has words for everyday objects such as saucepan and soup. Therefore, in the most diglossia situation, the S form would not occur in everyday conversation, and the L form would generally seem odd in writing. For the next is attitudes to S versus L in a diglossia situation. For the H, people prefer H variety even if they don't understand it, they respect it. H has prestige in a high status sense, and H is standardized in dictionary and in the grammar books. And for the L, they see L variety as something not worth to describe. Attitudes toward L variety is ambivalent, but people in some part of Switzerland and admire using L code and use it all the time with stranger. Number three is in some part of the country, they use H even in the normal community and use L locally. For the last is they read L very long. Diglossia with and without bilingualism. Diglossia define it as a characteristic of speech communities, not individual, because individual might be bilingual and communities are diglossia. In other words, diglossia described as social or institution bilingual, where there are two varieties are required to cover all communities domain. And this is a sample to relation between diglossia and bilingualism. The, for the number one, refers to a situation where the society is diglossic. Two languages are required to cover the full range of domains, and most individuals are bilingual. And for number two, describe situation where individuals are bilingual, but there is not community-wide functional differentiation in the use of their language. Many English-speaking countries, in this description, individuals, many English-speaking countries fit this description. Individuals might be bilinguals in Australia, the USA, England, and New Zealand, but their two languages are not used by the whole community in different domains. For number three, describe the situation of politically united groups where two languages are used for different functions, but by largely different speech communities. And for the last is number four, describe the situation of monolingual groups, and Fishman suggests this is typical of isolated ethnic communities where there is little contact with other linguistic groups. And for the next material will be presented by Sartika.
I will explain the next material. Extending the scope of diglossia. First, each code or language is used in a different situation from the other. For example, in earlier decades in Paraguay, the domains where Guarani was used were quite distinct from those where Spanish was appropriate. Because of this similarity, it was suggested that bilingual communities like Souris and Paraguay should also be considered as example of diglossia. The second, diglossia is used in a broader sense. Diglossia is here being used in a broader sense which gives most weight to picture or creation to the complementary function of two varieties or code in a community. Feature 1 and 3 that has explained before are dispensed with, and the term diglossia is generalized to cover any situation where two languages are used for different functions in a speech community. especially where one language is used for H function and the other for L function. There is a division of labor between the languages. And third, other features of the classic diglossia situation are also often relevant, but they are not regarded as a crucial to the definition. So, the H variety is generally the prestige variety, but people may also be attached to and admire the L variety, as in Paraguay, where people are typically proud of Guarani. L is learned at home and the H variety in school, but some people may use H in the home too, as in Sauris where parents use Italian to children in order to prepare them for school. Literature is generally written in H rather than L, but there may be a rich oral literature in L. Thought H has generally been standardized and codified in grammar books and dictionaries for centuries. L languages are also increasingly being codified and standardized. Next slide, please. The next is polyglosia. First, the glossic situation involves two contrasting varieties H and L. The glossic situation involves two contrasting varieties H and L. Sometimes, however, a more sophisticated concept is needed to describe the functional distribution of different varieties in a community. People like Kalala in Bukavu use a number of different codes for different purposes. The second, the understanding of polyglosia. The term polyglosia has been used for situations like this where a community regularly uses more than three languages, and above is the example of polyglosia. We can see in the screen, Oilin Tan's Cantonese-speaking community in Singapore described in example 5 can similarly be described as polyglossic, but the relationship between the various codes or varieties are not all straightforward. Table 2.5 represents one way of describing them. Mandarin SH using as Singapore English formal variety, and Cantonese Hokkien as L using as Singapore English informal variety. Both Mandarin and formal Singapore English can be considered H varieties alongside different L varieties. Mandarin function and each variety in relation to at least two L varieties. Hokkien and Cantonese informal Singapore English is an L variety alongside the more formal H variety. So, for this speech community, there are two H varieties and a number of L varieties in a complex relationship. Next slide, please. Changes in diglossia situation. First, diglossia has been described as a stable situation. It is possible for two varieties to continue to exist side by side for centuries. Alternatively, one variety may displace the other. Second, example of changing situation in diglossia. Latin, for example, Latin was ousted from its position and the H language in Europe. For example, as the L varieties gradually expanded or leaked up into more formal domains, England was diglossic in the broad sense after 1066 when the Normans were in control. France was the language of the court administration, the legal system, and high society in general. English was the language of the peasant in the field and the street. Third, consider the use of diglossia or polyglossia. It is worth considering whether the term diglossia or perhaps polyglossia should be used to describe the complementary code used in all communities. In all speech communities, people use different varieties or codes in informal contexts, such as religious and legal ceremonies as opposite to relaxed casual situations in multilingual. In multilingual situations, the codes selected are generally distinct languages. Example, French or Swahili for formal situation versus a vernacular tribal language such as Chi for casual interaction in the Democratic Republic of the Congo Zaire. So if we expand the concept of diglossia to encompass different contextual varieties as well as distinct languages. The situation in this township could be described as triglossic rather than diglossic. I think enough for me. Next will be explained by Ninuk Wihartami.
The next material is about code switch and code mixing, participants, solidarity, and status. People sometimes switch code within a domain or social situation. When there is some obvious change in the situation, such as the arrival of a new person, it's easy to explain the switch. Let me read the example text first. Uh, the Maori is in italics. The translation is in small capitals. Sarah say, I think everyone's here except Mary. And John answered, she said she might be a bit late, but actually I think that's her arriving now. Sarah said, you're right. Kia ora here mai ke te peakoi. The translation, hi Mer, come in. How are you? And Mary said, kia ora eho ke te pai. Have you started yet? The translation is, hello my friend, I'm fine. That picture is conversation between three people, Sarah, John, and Mary, were the participants. Sarah switched to Maori to greet her. The Maori greetings is an expression of solidarity. So a code switch may be related to a particular participant or address. In this case, the switch indicates a change in the social situation and takes positive account of the presence of a new participant. Let's next slide. Uh, Let me read another example. Bookmo is in small capitals, Ranamo in lowercase. John say, hello Peter, how is your wife now? And Peter answered, oh, she's much better, thank you, Jan. She's out of hospital and convalescing well. John say, that's good. I'm pleased to hear it. But do you think you could help me with this pesky form? I'm having a great deal of difficulty with it. Peter answered, of course, give it here. In that picture is conversation between three people. I'm sorry, that's a conversation between two people, John and Peter. In the fact that the change of topic here symbolizes a change in the relationship between the men. In status, they switch from their roles as neighbor to their role as bureaucrat and member of the public. In other words, they switch from a personal interaction to a more formal transaction. This kind of role switch is commonly associated with a code switch in multilingual communities. Next slide. The second is about topic. Uh, Bilinguals often find it easier to discuss particular topics in one code rather than another. In Hemsberget, bookmall is the more appropriate variety for discussing a business matter. For many bilinguals, certain kinds of referential content are more appropriately or more easily expressed in one language than the other. For the example, Chinese students from Guangzhou who are flying together in an English-speaking country tend to use Cantonese with each other, except to discuss their studies when they switch to English. This is partly because they have learned the vocabulary of economics or linguistics or physics in English. So they do not always know the words for capital formation or morpheme or electron in Cantonese. But it goes further than simply borrowing words from English. They often switch to English for considerable stretches of speech. The technical topics are firmly associated with a particular code, and the topic itself can trigger a switch to the appropriate code. Next slide. To understand this part, let me read the text first. Polly is a young British black woman. She speaks standard English with a West Midland accent as well as patois, a variety of Jamaican Creole, learned from her parents. On one occasion, a school teacher annoyed her intensely by criticizing a story Polly had written about British West Indians. In particular, he corrected the use of patois by one of her characters, something he knew nothing about. Her response was to abuse him in patois, swearing at him only just below her breath. The effect was electrifying. He seemed terrified. He threatened to send her to the headmaster, but in the fact he didn't, and she noted with the satisfaction that he left her alone after that. So, the text above explained that Polly, who is young British black woman that speaks standard English with a West Midland accent, as well as patois, a variety of Jamaican Creole, learned from her parents. Polly wrote her work in patois. Then the teacher corrects Polly's writing like he knew nothing about it. Because of this, Polly didn't like it and swore at him in patois. Polly's switch to patois was here used to express affective rather than referential meaning. The teacher didn't need to understand the word. He simply needed to get the affective message. In other contexts too, switching between patois and standard English can achieve a range of interesting rhetorical effects. A switch from patois to standard English with the local British regional pronunciation can signal a person's identity as a West Midlander in conversation where local regional values are relevant. A language switch in the opposite direction is often used to express disapproval. So a person may code switch because they are angry. I think that's enough from me, and the next material will be delivered by Khofifah Mitha Saviera.
Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. I will present about the metaphorical switching. According to this example, we can see in many of the examples discussed so far, the specific reason for a switch can be identified with reasonable confidence. Thought it would be possible to predict when a switch will occur without knowing what speaker intend to say next. It is often possible to count for switch after they have occurred. Next. From the example, this type of switching has sometimes been called metaphorical switching. Each of the chords represents of symbols of sets of social meanings, and the speaker draws on the associations of each, just as people use metaphors to represent complex meanings. The term also reflects the fact that this kind of switching involves theoretical skills. Next, lexical borrowing. Borrowing of this kind generally involves single words, mainly nouns, and it's motivated by lexical needs. It is very different from switching, where speakers have general choice about which words and phrases they will use in which language. Example, New Zealand English has borrowed the word mana from Maori, for instance. There is no exact equivalent to its meaning in English, although it is sometimes translated as meaning prestige. Next. Linguistic concentrate. In this part, we can find 2 points. The first point is equivalence concentrate. Example, English first possible switch point, red boat, battle rock, no big house, grandy mansions, yes, big mansion or grandy house. And the second one is matrix language frame or M.hum. Example, Leo, Siko, come, no book, Angu, today I didn't come with my books. Next. And the last part is attitude to code switching. We can see the example. In Hammersburg, 2 linguists recorded university students' Hong Kong vacations. The student unconsciously switched between the local dialect and standard, switch between the local dialect Norwegian according to the topic. When they later heard the tape song, the awkward and promised they would not switch in this way in the future. When I switch inadvertently, I usually realize soon afterwards and correct myself, but it is still embarrassing. Code switching is not very pure. My attitude towards code switching is a very relaxed one. I think that's enough for our discussions, for our presenting. I'm sorry with any problems, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.